Hey there friends, right, this is part 3 of this little series about telling your origin story, and now we've reached conflict. So yesterday we talked about character and how it's ideally what you want is a character, your true authentic character, but also in a way that resonates with your audience. And today we're talking about conflict, because the conflict in your story is the part that draws people in, right? You know, so we've talked about how stories are flight simulators for life, basically. So the reason that we don't enjoy stories that are about people who have everything they want is because there's no drama in there, there's no conflict. And because we use stories to figure out what we do in difficult situations, stories without difficult situations have no sort of inherent value. Does that make sense? So, you know, when we're looking at origin stories, we're often looking at moments of conflict. You know, a character is living a life and they're triggered into a moment of conflict, and then the consequence, which we'll talk about in the next video, is what comes out of that, and they bring back the treasure which they then sell. In our case, we're generally selling the treasure we've bought back as a result of our character going into conflict and the learning, the consequences, or the insight that we've made. We then sell that treasure on to help other people, right? So if you give you a couple of simple examples, let's take a fictional one first. Take Batman. Bruce Wayne is a young kid. He's gone to see The Mask of Zorro, I think, with his mum and dad. They're rich. They take a back alley back to the car and they're robbed, and both his parents are shot dead. And in that moment, you have all the elements that kind of constitute Batman as a character. And obviously that's fictional. And stories, in a sense, are all simplifications. They're all fictional to some degree. And it can be really helpful for us if we kind of collapse the conflict into a single moment or a single event. It's not always possible, but it's certainly something that you try and do because it just makes it easier to tell the beat of a story. But let's take another example. I talked a couple of weeks ago about the origin story for the Invictus Games. Now, these are the games that came up by Prince Harry in the UK for a competition for injured men and women who've been in the army, service personnel, basically. And he came up with that idea, he says, on a plane back from Iraq or Afghanistan, I can't remember which one, but he's on this plane, he's healthy, he's rich, he's privileged, and around him are injured men and women, injured service personnel, and he feels that kind of conflict. He wants to do something, and Invictus Games is what he comes up with. And again, you know, you've got in that little origin story a perfect kind of encapsulation of all the elements of that sort of thing. You know, in my case, as I mentioned yesterday or in the last video, my origin story starts with this line. In 2015, I began to feel like I was living the wrong life, that nagging feeling. And, you know, the conflict, you can feel the conflict coming, right? The conflict that I was successful. I was running a business with clients around the world. You know, I in many ways, I was living a very fortunate life, but it wasn't right. And, you know, in my origin story, I then get into the conflict about, you know, the difference between, I guess, managing a business and actually being creative. You know, there's that kind of thing. And I guess the thing is, we're not looking, you know, these are extreme examples in some respect. We're not necessarily looking for, you know, a war. It doesn't have to be a big fight. If you have high stakes in your conflict, then, you know, that can be very useful. But also, you know, most of the things that you know, kind of annoy people or upset people, you know, they're not necessarily big things, right? And at the end of the day, whatever problem your product, your service, your business, your brand, whatever that solves, that's what we want the conflict to be around. Because, you know, we've all got hundreds of origin stories for different parts of our character and different parts of our lives. But this is about business storytelling, right? So yesterday I had you think about the character, your character, and how you could thematically relate that to your audience. And today I want you to think about spend a few minutes thinking about the conflict that tipped you into the person you are now, with the knowledge or the resources or the skills or whatever that you have now, because that's what we're going to be selling. And of course, we need to define the conflict. So tomorrow we can talk about the consequence, the insight, the what have you, that led you to have these skills and have the experience and be worth people paying you for. Does that make sense? Brilliant. Right, okay, so if you're on Facebook or LinkedIn or whatever, please like the video. If you're on YouTube, please support the channel, subscribe to the channel, or you can reach out and ask a question, because I'm very friendly and I always reply. All right, thanks for watching.